So warm welcome also from my side, many thanks to the kind words and introduction and the cooperation to Ambassador Steinlein. This is part of the Pariser Platz Dialogue that we do. This was is an event series that has been founded in 2020 by Henrik Enderlein, whom we think dearly, who's passed away 3 years ago. And so we're also a bit in the memory of Henrik, and particularly grateful that this cooperation took place for this particular event. Now, we're doing this event on an extremely relevant topic, capital market integration and competitiveness, and we're doing this on the same day as the leaders are not only discussing top jobs, but they're also discussing the strategic agenda, and one of the specific focus points will be competitiveness and capital markets union integration, which they discussed with your report, Enrico, in April, and they wanted to rediscuss as part of the strategic agenda today. Now, we know that capital markets union is extremely relevant, and the ambassador said it again, both for the huge investment agenda, but also as a key lever to finance innovation and possibly a way of understanding better why there's been a decoupling to the growth development in the US. So in the US, capital markets play a much larger role. And the question is whether in enhancing integration and development of capital markets, Europe could make further progress in catching up with the US on innovation and on growth potential. Now, the relevance of capital markets and capital market integration is not new, in particular in a currency union. And I'm grateful in the audience also to welcome President Trichet. So we know capital markets integration, in particular in a currency union, is very relevant. So the key question, in a way, we want to address is, why is it different this time round? Are we in a situation where the consensus, where the political momentum really makes a difference? And I think we really have a truly fantastic panel here, which I think comes also with a responsibility that we should, in this hour and 15 minutes, really come to some concrete conclusions, maybe ideally even concrete conclusions for Franco-German cooperation and how to advance Europe further. Now, of course, the ambassador already mentioned it. We are doing this shortly before an election, a national election, and one indication that this has already had some disruptive force. This election is the fact that Christian Noyer has been replacing Bertrand Dumont for head of Treasury, who would otherwise be here, but because we are in the reserve period, of course, he said he couldn't participate, and I'm extremely grateful that you took his place. Certainly not a replacement, maybe an upgrade even, so thank you very much. Now, we will come to the topic briefly before we open up to the audience. We will have first a panel discussion with some introductory remarks, then a discussion will be opening up to the audience. So take good notes and prepare your questions. But let me first introduce the panel. To my right, Enrico Letta, who's president of our older sister, if I may say, the Jacques Delors Institute here in Paris, and was the EU Rapporteur for the future of the single market, and his report, Much More Than a Market, Empowering the Single Market to Deliver a Sustainable Future and Prosperity for All EU Citizens, was not only published in April, but had as one of the key messages that capital market integration development would be important for advancing Europe. Now, previously, you served as Dean of the School of International Affairs and at Sciences Po, and were Prime Minister of Italy between 2013 and 2014. Let me now turn to Staatssekretär Thoms. You are State Secretary for Financial Market Policy, European Policy and International Financial Policy at the Federal Ministry in Berlin. One of the key players really for preparing the Eurogroup discussion on the matter in the recent month. And before joining the Finance Ministry, among the many posts you had, you were German ambassador to Brazil. Then let me turn to you, Natasha Valla. Natasha is Dean of Sciences Po School of Management and Impact, and you're also president of the Productivity Board here in France. Among the few stations, many stations that you had, you were Deputy Director General for Monetary Policy at the European Central Bank, and also head of the Policy and Strategic Division at the European Investment Bank. And I think you bring very nicely the combination between sort of academia and policy, as well as the real economy, productivity, and finance. So great to have you here on our panel. And I turn over to Fritzi Köhler-Geib. You are the chief economist of the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau in Frankfurt, and also the head of the economics department. Before that, you were for almost 20 years at the World Bank. And maybe for those of you that are not familiar with the KfW is one of the biggest promotional banks, and also Fritzi herself, but also the KfW is quite key in the debate on how to channel private capital in transformational purposes in Germany and beyond. So great to have you here. And last by far not least, Christian Noyer, the former governor of the French Central Bank, the Banque de France, as well as vice president of the European Central Bank. And your report that came out last month, I believe, or end of April, was mandated by the French government, really tries to operationalize how to build an investment and savings union, and came up with some concrete proposals. So I think we can applaud now for this panel, if you don't mind. Enrico, let me start with you for your introductory remarks. I mean, your report had Capital Markets Union, or you call it Saving and Investment Union, as a key part. It was presented to the leaders. So what's the rationale? Why did you put this topic top or among the top? And also, what's your perception of how this element has been received among the leaders and the political establishment?
Let me start by thanking you and the embassy here for the organization of this event. I think it's really timely and very interesting, and thank you all for this opportunity. I will say a few words on that, why the financial services at the center of the relaunch of the single market. For a very simple reason, because the single market had a great successful life for 30 years. And then we had the feeling that on three main subjects that were put aside since the beginning of the story of the single market, we were lagging behind because of the choice to put them at the national dimension and not to give them to the lower integration 30 years ago. And these three subjects, telecom, energy, and financial services, were the subject where 30 years ago the leaders told the lower, the national dimension is enough. We don't need to have a European dimension to be competitive. And we are more secure if we are in control at national level on telecom, on energy, and on financial services. That were the two arguments. Today we have very clear in mind that we are less secure if we are only at national level controlling these three subjects, and at the same time we are less competitive. That is the key point. And on financial services, I can tell you that presenting my report in the last weeks around Europe, yesterday evening I was in Brussels at the Association of German Insurances, speaking to a very German audience, and I used the slogan that I'm using now, and I'm trying to have a sort of fine-tuning, but the slogan works. The national sovereignty flag on the financial services makes happy only Wall Street and not our people. That is the key point. The fragmentation of our financial markets are making happy Wall Street and all the American finance. And of course, we're not against the Americans, but we have to be competitive with them. And integration of financial markets is absolutely essential to be competitive, as well as the integration on telecom and on energy. This is why the report, the core of the report, these three roadmaps, with the idea to integrate. My report is without any proposal of treaty change, because I know how political difficulties we are having today, so it's not time for treaty changes. It's time to be very straight to the point and to be able to have some changes very fast. I'm very happy because Christian Noyer report, we worked together in the final part of the preparation of my report, and I'm very happy because of his positions. And I have to say that I had so many meetings in the 8 months preparing the report, and one of the most interesting meetings was with State Secretary Thoms. And I'm really grateful to you for the cooperation and a very good deep dive that we had together. And just one point, because just to set up the scene and to introduce my ideas on that, why I answer your question. And the question is, why now, after 10 years of failure? Why now? And I think now for a very simple reason. First reason, because the 10 years after crisis, lagging behind of the US, we are paying a price of that, and we are perceiving this price as there. And this was the perception I had listening all the government, the 27 governments, listening the different stakeholders, environment in the member states, the perception of a sense of urgency. And we are not, we need to act very, very fast is there. And the other key point is the fact that the failure until now of Capital Markets Union, in my view, is first of all because we weren't able to link the integration of financial services until now within the European path to a higher purpose, a purpose good for the people. When in the past we were able to launch the Capital Markets Union, it was for very good purposes, but at the end of the day, it was very much, I would say, finance-centered. And if you ask a political leader, one of the 27, no matter if he's from the left or from the right or from the center, to go in a rally, in an electoral rally, and to say, we promise you, voters, we give you the integration of financial markets. The reaction of the people is, oh, it's not for me, it's for bankers. And if the leader feels that the people are not pushing, the leader will not have any political engagement on that. This is why the only possibility, in my view, is to make the very complicated deal, but this is the main proposal of my report, to link the integration of financial markets to the answer to the main question for the next 5 years in Europe, that is how to finance the transition. Because the transition, the just, digital and green transition costs a lot. There's a very good report written by Pisani-Ferry and Selma Mahfouz 1 year ago, saying that we have to recognize and to be aware of the cost of the transition. Otherwise, the transition won't be a good result, and we will not have the transition. So my main point is how to link the two and to create a bridge between the two, having the possibility then to have the answer to the question, because we know very well we are divided in Europe. Even in the Franco-German couple, there's a division on positions on that, on how to answer the question, on how to finance the transition. And I can tell you that I was a little bit shocked during the electoral campaign, and this is my final word, Johannes. And I want to, it's not time, even if we are in an embassy, it's not time for diplomatic words. It's time for telling the truth. I don't saying that diplomats are not telling the truth. I'm saying that. But the key point is that going around Europe and attending many events during the electoral campaign, presenting my report, I had the feeling that the electoral campaign was based on two different Europes. A Europe in France, in Italy, in Spain, where everyone is giving for granted that there will be a new next generation EU. No matter you are from the left, from the right, there's a common sense that there will be a new next generation EU. And another Europe, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the Scandinavian countries, in Czech Republic, where no matter you are left or right, everyone is giving for granted that there would no more common debt at the European level. And it's very complicated to think that the two positions can be part of the same discourse. And my report is trying to say to the leaders, we have to find a compromise. And the compromise, by definition, is, I would say, something having part of the two ideas. And this is why the integration of financial markets can have today a new life, a successful life, because we can have this higher purpose, that is the making possible that the transition can be a success.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Now, it seems that the leaders have picked up your point, and we mentioned that today there is another discussion on competitiveness and capital markets integration. Also, the feedback to the Eurogroup was good statement, but now we really need to follow up, so be ambitious. Now, these are also technical topics, and we've seen that the debate in the Eurogroup is maybe not as advancing at times as some of the leaders would have expected. What is your experience from the discussions in the Eurogroup? How confident are you on the theme that this time is different?
Well, first, thanks for having me on this distinguished panel. It's really an honor, and also this distinguished audience, if I may say so. Then secondly, no, there will be no next generation EU. No, we'll discuss that. I want to say, this debate comes at a very special time. I mean, at the UN, we always say in the debate that you always, oh, this is a timely event. I don't know if this comes at a particularly bad time or a particularly good time. It comes at an interesting time, that's for sure. It's also well chosen with the European Council today, where, as you mentioned, we will be discussing a capital markets union. It will be on the agenda. Competitiveness will be on the agenda. And that's good. I think we're focusing a little too much on the personnel issues. We should be focusing a little more on the real issues, on the substance. And I believe that there are indeed some important decisions in the making. The Green Deal will stay as important as it was before, but it will not be the overarching topic anymore that defines all other issues. The one issue that will define all other issues in the next cycle of the Commission and the European Parliament will be, of course, as you mentioned, competitiveness, but I think competitiveness is really just code, EU speak for what really means growth, productivity growth, and innovation. That's what we need in Europe. And the Capital Markets Union, in this respect, is just one issue, but it's an important one in this concert of measures we will have to take. And then, of course, it's a very bulky issue in many ways because it consists of so many small and bigger things that are hard to grasp, hard to understand, hard to communicate. We have already been doing quite a bit. I mean, this discussion has been going on for a while. And we have been doing things like the Listing Act and the Retail Investment Strategy, which as such are all small steps, but they're all part of something like a Capital Markets Union. So let's not forget this. And then you have been asking about what to expect of the future. What will we actually be doing? I think, Enrico, you mentioned a division in Europe and also that Franco-German tandem is not always working as well as it should be. I have a different opinion on this, especially in the field I'm working on. We have worked very successfully Paris, Berlin, and then also Madrid as a presidency and Rome. When it came to reforming the fiscal rules. The new Stability and Growth Pact, the Economic Governance Review, was actually a big success of European cooperation, also in particular Franco-German cooperation. And I believe that's also a role model what lies ahead in terms of the Capital Markets Union, because this is also in many ways a Franco-German initiative. You remember the a joint roadmap that Bruno Le Maire and Christian Lindner came up with last year, which was really the basis for what we then worked on in the Eurogroup, where we have defined the measures which are now within reach. I believe that we need more than what is defined in the Eurogroup statement. I feel that it's very, very positive that we got some additional momentum from the European Council in April, that we got additional momentum also from the German-French Ministers' Council on the 28th of May in Berlin. that we'll be getting additional momentum maybe tonight, of course, with this big question mark that all are now thinking about at this point in time regarding next Sunday and the Sunday after that. But of course, Germany and France can drive this again together. We have defined the things which are within reach. We'll be discussing this later when we talk about securitization. I'm certain we can relatively quickly make great progress when it comes to an investment product. There will be progress that can be made. We, of course, need to cut back bureaucracy and red tape in many areas. I think this is a very important issue. There's other things we can work on, even including a solvency law. We'll be discussing this later on, but something we can do. I believe that the German-French relationship can be a driver of all this. It has been a driver in the past. It can also be in the future. But what I can say here is that we are 100% committed in Berlin to take this forward because there is simply no alternative to this.
Thank you very much. Natasha, one of the key elements, and Enrico also mentioned it, is that capital markets union or capital markets play an important role in financing innovation. And the diagnosis is that maybe because we are so bank reliant and have given capital markets less of a role for financing innovation, we see little innovation, in particular, not only at the patent and startup phase, but at the scale-up phase. Now, you know the real economy, you're viewing it from a perspective not only academia, but also your work at the Productivity Board. What's your sense? What role could capital markets play in scaling up, and where are the problems that we have?
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be in such a high-level panel. And it's interesting because the Capital Markets Union, if I'm not mistaken, was born with the 5 Presidents report in 2015, which is exactly the report where the national productivity boards were created and suggested to the national member states. And at the time, in the French case, there was a first president of the NPB, and then I came second. And when it started, the understanding of productivity, and in brackets, and competitiveness was really, really different from what we look at right now. At the time, to be blunt, it was really looking at the German current account surplus and the deficits in other countries and the way we could make it work together internally. Now, the things we're looking at is exactly what you were mentioning. What are the sources, the industrial sources of innovation, the economic value that brings innovation, the financial structures that help the tissue of economic actors and firms to be innovative, and to be innovative. Why? To improve productivity, to create growth and eventually jobs, which is something that then feeds back, loops back into competitiveness, but in a more, I would say, cooperative mindset. So this whole idea has been digested collectively. We've gone through crises together. And I think this is an interesting outcome of an intention that had different roots at the start. Now, what we look at when we look at productivity right now is indeed very much driven towards innovation, towards AI, generative AI. As you can imagine, we try to have estimates of what can be expected at the European level, at the national level, what can be the synergies, and what are the scales of investments, what is the speed at which innovation can bring us this productivity boost that we need, because I don't want to give all the basic numbers, but you know that Europe is really lagging behind the US and lagging even more in the past few years. And within Europe, France is even in a worse position for what matters, what regards apparent labor productivity. So here, when we look at the chain of financing, and I think it's interesting to look at the Capital Markets Union very granular. I'll come to the general statement later, but we know that innovation comes from the startup world. The startup can be, inside a big group, but mostly, innovators that are entrepreneurs and that raise some money, that have skills. Mind this complementarity, and this is one of the conclusions I will have. You need money, but you need skills to be able to bring this value added and this high sort of growth potential. And in Europe, the strength that we have and that we do not have in mind enough, and I'm sure you look at it in your institution the same way, is that, of course, when you look at patents, we're not the best. Of course, China is going through the roof, even better than the US, but we are not that bad as applying and diffusing innovation and tools that have been developed by others. I'm simplifying, and that's already something, right? I mean, if we're able to lever on this ability, and this ability is a very high skill and high capital intensive activity. So we should aim at both, I think, in Europe. We have the ability to be, most of European startups are new, so-called new to the world. They did not exist before. It's not something that came from elsewhere and that we have sort of reshuffled or stolen or whatever. We really create this value. And on top of that, we are able to use the value created by others and leverage it and bring it into the economy, into employment and into growth. So what is missing is this ability to find funding and to find private funding. I'll have a few words on the private public, but you probably have more to say than me on this. But this synergical move. But we need to be able to mobilize this funding in a risk phase, which is not only venture capital, but which comes all through the life, or I would say the first 10 years of a growing company. When we look at studies that compare the US and Europe, after 10 years of existence, for those startups that have survived and that have growth in the first phases, our European firms are able to raise half of the capital that US ones are raising. So funding is the issue. So capital markets union is the issue because we generate, and Mr. Noyer will illustrate that more deeply than I do, but we generate a lot of savings in Europe that goes to the wrong place. CF, the cross-national investments in particular towards the US. So we are hindered by the availability of finance. That's a clear diagnostic. We are hindered by a lack of skills. So this is a bit the paradox of Europe. On the one hand, we're able to generate those high skills. They're fairly cheap, in particular in this country. There is some leakage. Some people are leaving. In some countries, they are leaving more than others. But still, we have this ability to produce still, but and yet we don't have the ability to use capital and skilled labor in the best way for this growth to happen. So I think there should be a thought to those early stages development that bring incentives to the private sector to mobilize this money in a risky environment. Now, and then the answer is already in the reports, right? How do you incentivize private savers to take more risks? There are regulatory dimensions to it. So the diagnostic here again is well made. It needs to be a political priority, and a political priority that is very complementary to a policy which is very far from capital markets union, which is education policy. And I think here we need to have this twin thinking between how do I educate my people, how do I bring in these entrepreneurship skills, not only mindset, but also skills. It's not easy. I see that in my school. We have a curriculum for entrepreneurship in the business school in Sciences Po. And we're happy to have the Sciences Po's, pairing with engineers coming from engineering schools. And they work well when we host them in our incubator for a couple of years after they graduate. And some of them work well, but we need to work a lot more in a more targeted way at this triptych: education, private capital mobilization, and the third corner of the triptych is public-private money. Because the second number I want to quote is that public money in Europe is a very good catalyst for private money in those early stages and growth phases of startups. And this is true for the startup world, for the innovation. This is also true for the other small entities, small enterprises that are less cutting edge, less innovative, that are more in the traditional activity of things, but that are the ones that generate employment. So I will stop here. That would be another chapter, and that's a very important dimension.
No, thank you very much. I guess the triptych which you alluded to is also linked in a way to an ecosystem that maybe in the US exists a bit more, where sort of probably public, but also a sort of a entrepreneur skills are also linked to financial knowledge in a way. The skills to have the ability to attract financing, to kind of operationalize not only in terms of engineering, but also in terms of where to go to get the financing to do the scale up. So it's the skills also in that respect and an ecosystem that kind of supports that. Yeah. Thank you, Natasha. Now, speaking of ecosystem and the role of public money, we turn to you, Fritzi, but also in terms of, in a way, the interplay between banks, public support and capital markets, because we know in Europe it's 70% of real economy financing that goes to the banks. It will probably not fundamentally change, but so we need to also look at the role that banks play in accessing the capital markets.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also from my side, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure and honor. To the discussion at that point, I'd like to add 3 points to answer your question, Johannes. 1, on the high relevance of the banking sector in Europe. 2, the need to still leverage capital markets. And then 3, on policy measures to get there. On the banking sector. The banking sector in Europe is 3 times as large as the one in the US compared to GDP. 1/3 of household wealth, private household wealth in Europe is held in low-yielding instruments such as bank deposits or cash, 11 trillion euro. And also we know from our surveys about German small and medium-sized enterprises, about 1/3 of financing of investments happens through bank lending, capital markets playing literally no role. With this, I come to the second point, the relevance of leveraging capital markets. And this exactly as Ambassador Steinlein put before, and you also referred to it, Enrico Letta, the need to finance the transformation. And I think it's always useful to remind ourselves of the mere size of the investment needs, be it the green transformation with yearly 477 billion, and then in addition, the digital transformation with around 125 billion. And part of those investments will be able to be financed through the banking sector, in particular when it comes to already mature technologies. Yet, the International Energy Agency has estimated that about 35% of technologies that we need for the green transformation are still in pilot or scale-up stage, where, because innovative ideas most of the times are immaterial, banking comes to its limits. And there we need capital markets. So that brings me to the third point on policy measures. And because we start with a system that so heavily depends on banking, I think that securitization and reinvigorating this instrument is key in such an environment, because it represents the bridge between a banking system and capital markets, because banks can, through securitization, transfer risks to other market participants and free their balance sheets for further lending. A second area that I see critical is mobilizing those 11 trillion of private household wealth that goes to bank deposits and cash. We need those in capital markets. And this is exactly the point that you mentioned, that we need to make clear that this is in the interest of people in Europe. And there, if we want to mobilize private investors to invest in investment funds or ETFs, we need to focus on financial literacy. And most likely also tax incentives are needed in that context to start it off. And the third area that I see critical is access for companies to capital markets. One point to address is the debt equity bias. And here I think we need to address the preferential tax treatment of debt relative to equity. But then also we need to talk about how to make stock market access for companies easier and how to make stock markets more attractive to companies. I think we have some good examples already in Europe. We have Sweden, where over the past decade we had 500 IPOs, more than in France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Spain together. And in Sweden, there was a strong focus on exactly creating that ecosystem around stock markets with a strong retail investor base, private household wealth, institutional investors such as pension funds and insurance companies, and also sufficient analysts on stock market issues. And then I think really relevant is what Natasha Waller mentioned, how to use startup transformation of innovative ideas to marketable products. And I think we've seen very relevant and good developments in Europe in recent years. However, with the US venture capital market being 3 times as large as the European venture capital market when it comes to comparison to economic activity, there's still way to go. I think there are really good initiatives, as for example, and I give a German example on that, the Future Fund, or also the Growth Fund, where public money is used as funds of funds to feed into the startup market, not investing directly in startups, but to feed capital into that market, developing that market at the same time as allowing international investors to come in and focus on the scale-up and growth phase of startups. So to sum up, I think there are really good proposals on the table to leverage capital markets better. And I would also like to remind us that that is one element, because we also need companies to want to invest in Europe. So overall, we need an attractive investment environment where companies can achieve attractive risk-return profiles with those needed investments in Europe.
Thank you very much, including for the reminder that the competitive agenda is, of course, a larger one, as Herr Thoms already reminded us. Now, Christian Noyer, your report was really aimed at operationalize the collected wisdom in a way that we have on how important it is to go ahead. Now, how would you and have you in the report kind of put that forward now? Maybe zooming in to concrete proposals as well as the method of getting there.
Thank you very much. Yes, the report was really, I mean, it was coming in the wake of a very strong political momentum, started with the joint statement by the German and French ministers, as was reminded, and then the report that was still to come from Enrico Letta's required at the highest level in Europe, and all the political momentum around. And so what Bruno Le Maire asked us to do was to look at very concrete proposals and try to find a very few ones that could trigger big amounts or big fruits. I will not go into one of them, which was the aspect of savings and how to, you just mentioned that. I fully agree with you. There are many things to do. It was also alluded by Staatssekretär Thoms. But looking at 2 others, yes, first, securitization. Let's have a few numbers in mind. Before the big financial crisis, securitization market in Europe was 400 billion a year. Today, it's 150. So we lost 250. When we look at what happened elsewhere, it developed in the US, still strongly. We know it was where the problems came from. It developed strongly in Canada, developed strongly in Japan, and in other constituencies too. What happened? We killed it because of the decisions that were taken for good reasons in the wake of the financial crisis. There was an immediate response. So we blocked everything, almost everything. But then, in the meantime, we have prohibited all the dangerous behaviors like re-securitization or securitization without retention, as was done in Japan, as was done in Canada. And then we created an incredible thing that is a data warehouse at the request of the ECB. The ECB said, if you want us to take securitized instruments as collateral, We want to have a data warehouse with a following of loan by loan identification to be to have full transparency. So the banks and rating agencies build that. It works extremely well. We have the safest landscape in the world, by far the safest framework in the world. But still, we did not change anything in the regulation since then. If you look at what was done in Japan, Japan has done more or less the same, except the data warehouse. And the GFSC relaxed all the policies, provided, of course, the rules are followed. And more or less the same in Canada. So we know that if we relax that, we would be back to 400 billion a year. Net financing gain per year, 250 billion. And that's the way you explain by the banks will initiate most of the things, but rotates their balance sheet, etc. Then we looked at the famous idea of agencies as exists in the US, where some people consider it has been dangerous, by the way. The agencies in the US, when you look at 15 years later, it cost 0 penny to the US government, and it brought billions of revenues to the US government. But let's forget about the US. Look at what Canada and Japan has done. They created that sort of agency with all the necessary rules to ensure it's safer. It is safe. It works extremely well. The estimate we've made when we prepared the report by discussing with many market participants will probably be another 200, 250 billion a year. So net gain we can have in terms of financing between 400 and 500 billion a year is probably a conservative estimate. When I think back to the 800 billion we need for the two transitions, or more, or a bit more, 500 billion means if we don't do it, we will not finance the transition. If we do it, it's extremely likely we can finance the transition, period. That's it. So that's the first thing. On supervision, I must say it's a more complex issue, but I must say I've been the first one to be surprised. I thought when we started to work on the reports that because there was so much opposition, it could not be, and maybe it was not an immediate reward. It might not be one of the focus of the report. And then I discovered by discussing with many market participants, and I must say not only in France, but in other countries, in particular in Germany and in Italy, market participants were telling, and also in the North countries, market participants told us, we cannot reap all the benefits of the single market if we don't have a more unified supervision. Think of the infrastructures, not only Euronext, but Nasdaq Nordics. They told us we cannot have a single pool of liquidity. We cannot have, I mean, there are a lot of things that cannot really reap the benefit of having merged or developed and brought together different stock markets. It simply doesn't work. If we don't have a unique supervisory regime, it will not work. And then we turned to asset managers, and they told us, you cannot imagine. We create European products, but it's so complex. We need so many discussions and authorizations for many supervisors that really we don't reap the benefits of being European-wide. So it's simply more costly. We cannot delegate freely. I mean, delegating between France and Germany is as difficult as delegating between France or Germany and Australia or Chile. I mean, it's the same rules. So the result is that it's more costly, the fees are higher, and who pays? The simple savers, Mr. and Madame ordinary person in the street. So we came to the conclusion that yes, it was a real issue, and we had to move forward. Now maybe I should say a word on the idea of the so-called multi-speed approach that appears a bit in the report. I mean, for me, it's not a new idea. When you look at the banking regulations, there is a difference made between the big banks and the smaller banks. It's not organized the same way, and the role of the European supervisory authority is more important for the big banks than for the small banks, where the proximity with national supervisors is more important. And there are other examples of that. And if you look at, for instance, the infrastructures, we know there is some resistance to the idea of a unified supervisory framework. And we believe that it is really important for the big infrastructures, cross-border, systemic, where it makes a sense to unify that at the level of, say, ESMA. To simplify, it doesn't mean it would not require to take on board the national supervisor also in the process. And the small infrastructures that are basically mostly national and could remain national at least for the time being. So this two-speed is understandable. When we look at asset managers, I would say it's a little bit the same. And then how to progress? Well, we thought maybe saying there is a 20th regime, sort of that kind of concept, saying those who really have an interest in moving to a single supervision because they are pan-Europeans, they should be allowed to ask for a single supervisory framework, and of course, with reaping all the benefits of a single supervisor. If they are local asset managers with essentially working in one country, don't make things complicated. They can continue with their local supervisor. Now, there are also other ideas that are not in the report. For instance, I read recently a very good paper from Lorenzo Pinismaghi, who was a previous member of the executive board and now chairs the Société Générale. But he wrote that paper in the papers of Bocconi University, so I think it was really more personal reflection. And he said, well, maybe there would be a case to oblige the non-Europeans being there, rather than to shop around different national supervisors, to oblige them to go to a single supervisory framework. And we should reflect maybe on that.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that you mentioned this proposal by Lorenzo Pinismaghi, because to a certain extent it also provides a sort of an insight into the discussions we had on supervision, where we had an agreement on unifying supervision, or at least unifying the European approach to non-European, but for CCPs, for central counterparties, but we are not able to do this for Europe. So to a certain extent, it also sheds a bit of a shadow on our ability to go forward. And the great contribution of Christian's report was to really focus it on concrete proposals. Now, I would like to turn back to you, Heiko Thoms, on these two proposals we've just zoomed into, securitization and supervision. Where do you see the concrete progress that could be made? And then maybe secondly, we will then discuss it in the broader sense. Also, what sort of harmonization would be needed? What kind of broader harmonization agenda we will probably still need to work on beyond or connected to these two concrete proposals? And before you answer, I want to just a moment of sympathy to all of you. I mean, it's super hot here on the podium, but it's probably also super hot in the audience. So thanks a lot for enduring a very technical debate here, which I understand is probably not always that easy to follow when you're grasping for fresh air. But at the same time, thanks for staying tuned, and the word is yours.
Yeah, thanks. So on securitization, I simply agree with everything Christian Noyer has just said. This is something that we can work on, that we will work on, and where we'll be able to reach progress relatively quickly, in my view. So when I say I share everything Christian is saying, there's one thing, I don't know if he mentioned it or if he just alluded to it, when it comes to state guarantees, we're on a different page, I believe, but everything else, you said I can subscribe to 100%. We need to reverse this trend. I don't want to go into technical details. We can change quickly some of the regulatory framework conditions, but here we need to make a big leap forward, and I believe you're asking for a time frame, we can do this in the first half of 25. I believe this is something that is in the making. We're also working on it nationally, by the way. We have nominated a commission which is working on it, a task force, which is now working on concrete proposals and will publish these proposals in September, October. And this is then our contribution to what we can do on the European level. The Commission is already working on it as well. Normally, things are put on hold in this phase, but when it comes to securitization, Sean Berrigan told us that they're actually on this progressing right now. There will be stakeholder consultation already in September, and this is something that we can do, we can achieve, including, by the way, a platform solution that we are looking into as well, so that we can standardize more, create the environment that enables more on this. So the numbers you mentioned are striking. We know those numbers, and I think we should at least return to where we were before, maybe do even more than that. On supervision, it's a trickier topic. First, I don't believe that we'll be able to regulate or supervise our way into a capital markets union. With a stronger capital markets union, we'll also have a lot of progress in terms of more a single supervisor, but this is something that where we need to tread very carefully. Because there are indeed some gains, and you mentioned some of them that we can make relatively quickly too, I believe, but we should be very careful not to endanger the progress which is really possible, and also maybe in a relatively short period of time, by asking for too much, because resistance, I can tell you from my discussions in the Eurogroup, in Brussels, the resistance will suddenly become very strong if we are pushing this forward too much. So let's proceed step by step. Supervision is a strange animal because it concerns many different areas, from the single fund product to supervision of cross-border CCPs. So that you cannot, there's not one solution to all of this. When you mention market infrastructure, cross-border market infrastructure, certainly there is something we'd be willing to look at. Some gains can be made there. But for now, let's also look at convergence, supervisory convergence. It's an important issue. The practice needs to, of national institutions needs to get closer to each other, and then let's see where we can make concrete progress on certain supervisory aspects. What should not happen is that with the impulse to make things easier and more efficient, we end up in a place where we suddenly have a twofold supervision by the national authority and the European authority, which then takes longer and makes things indeed more complicated and more costly, which is why we are, with this opt-in model, a bit skeptical, because in the end, market participants will have to finance the supervisors as well. And if only a few opt in, for them, it would be extremely costly.
And in terms of further harmonization agenda? Because we do know that one of the issues that hold back further supervision is still relatively nationally transposed kind of rule book. We are far from a single rule book on quite a number of the capital market legislation. So including, of course, also the link to insolvency law, some of the tax law. Where do you see there the ability to push the agenda further?
we find the idea of a 28th regime in the field of insolvency laws, but also maybe in other areas, quite attractive. But it's a difficult discussion, especially when it comes to insolvency laws. There is a lot of opposition, and it's not about party colors. It's not about opposition or differences of opinion between individual countries. This is always a big fight between the finance minister and the justice minister. For some reason, I'm also a lawyer myself, but I have a hard way of seeing why insolvency laws go to the very heart of your national identity, but it seems to be the case. So there is something, we will certainly not be having one unified insolvency law in Europe anytime soon, but the way to go really, in our view, is the 28th regime, where you have the possibility to choose the European regime for your bond issuance, for instance. And this is not the first best, maybe a second best solution, but this is something where you can make real progress.
Enrico, the 28th regime was also in your report. What is your sense for the wider harmonization agenda? And maybe also a reaction to what Christian Noyer said about the more concrete proposals.
I strongly agree. I would like just to say that I put securitization in my report, and I decided to put, because we discussed together on that, I decided to put to check the reactions. That was the main point for me, because it is clear that securitization has still the stigma of the crisis among the great audience and the political debate. I can tell you that the reactions were not bad, and this is for me a very good, I would say, improvement of our discussion. That means that it's possible to move there, and I think it is absolutely necessary exactly to move in the direction that Heiko just said. So this is first point. Second point about supervision, we discussed many times. I strongly believe that the possibility to have to reinforce ESMA and to have I would say, a sort of solar system around ESMA with the national authorities cooperating with ESMA as the national bank are cooperating with Frankfurt. I think it's possible, and it can be the way in which we can overcome the main obstacle that exists on supervision, that is the opposition, not the opposition, the high fences put by 2 or 3 countries on that. And when I presented the report at the European Council, 18th of April, it was exactly the discussion on that. And I heard with my that the fences were very high and very high from small countries, very high fences. And the discussion about that, about how to, we say, manage the possibility to have a solar system with cooperation and not, it is one of the, I would say, institutional architecture at European level in which some creativity is needed, otherwise it would be impossible to get the result. But I think it's not impossible to get. And about the 28th regime, I think it's, I can give you the experience I had in the US on that, because I presented my report at the US Chamber of Commerce in DC 1 month ago, and I was surprised by the reaction of the American investors because they were interested, but then the eyes were enlightening for the 28th regime and the Passport 2 idea, saying that finally you understood that it's so complicated to invest in Europe because of the 24 languages, the 27 legal systems, the 27 fiscal systems. So you have to simplify. You have to give us a passport too, a master key, to be able to overcome these difficulties. And I had the feeling that that worked for, I would say, a non-European audience. And I can tell you that in my report, I put the 28th regime, I focused one target, and the target is the SMEs on other issues, because I think the 28th regime can be a method can work not only on the topics that Heiko just mentioned and Christian as well. But in general, there are many other topics, and on SMEs, I can tell you that I had the feeling that the support on the ground is big, because we know that the justice ministers will defend the national systems. So there's no way to, I would say, to cancel the national systems. But there's a way to create a sort of fast track, a common fast track to be more effective and more competitive. And I think it can work because from the ground, there's support. That is my feeling. I had many meetings with SMEs, associations at Brussels level, in Germany, in France, in Italy, everywhere in Europe, at European level. I had the feeling that they buy it, and the leaders are aware that if the system of SMEs is pushing, it is something good for them too, for the leaders, of course, because they have something to sell them, and the need to have the stakeholders and the large audience of the stakeholders on board of this exercise is absolutely necessary.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Fritzi, KfW is very active itself, used to be very active on securitization. Now it's still a focus point. What's your take of Christian Noyer's proposal on the field of securitization? Is that a key potential? And maybe let me add briefly another question. You mentioned Sweden and how to get this sort of investment culture in. Of course, for Sweden, we know one of the key elements they did is to bring the pension system on the capital market. So you have big players that are there contributing to this. So on securitization and on how to bring in that culture, maybe you can say a word.
Yeah, thank you very much. On securitization, I mean, I'm an economist, so I take the bigger picture view. When we think about economic necessity, it's clear. Then how to precisely do it, whether to do it with one common platform or use smaller platforms, I think that has advantages, disadvantages, and is a matter of negotiation that of course has impact, but I think it's so clear that there is an economic benefit that, to me, the way in which we go about that in that particular case is of secondary order. When it comes to the question of how to install a cultural ecosystem around stock markets, I think one really has to address all of the elements. As I said, I mean, 11 trillion is a high number of private household wealth. If we can mobilize that, we also have a really important part of the transformation being better off. So that would be the retail investor base, but certainly we also need institutional investors. And in that context, I mean, is for any system that has a higher real interest rate than the growth of population, capital-based pension system is better for society. However, the challenge, of course, there with reform is to switch from one to the other because you have one generation that pays double, and so it can only happen in a gradual way, and I think that is the challenge that we are facing right now.
Before I open up to the audience, that we cover briefly, I mean, we've covered already a large ground, but that we nevertheless cover briefly the issue of where the leadership for the political proposals that we've now collected would come from in a situation where we are faced with an election here in France. Now, we're not want to speculate greatly, and I'm grateful for the ambassador that in a way put it already before the clamor by addressing it himself. But I would nevertheless briefly turn to you, Christian Noyer, in terms of where would the political impetus come if we were in a situation where there is, maybe in this country in particular, a lot of focus on domestic issues, and where we may not see the impetus that we would need for pushing this forward?
It's really difficult to answer given all the uncertainties. What I would say is that the good thing is that this agenda is now pushed widely in Europe. Of course, Germany is one of the great leaders, but as was mentioned before, there is a strong understanding and deep agreement in many other countries. I think most in the Eurogroup probably, but we see a real political certainty that there is a need there in Spain, in Italy, and in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in other countries. So I don't think we are in the same situation as we were at the time where there was this joint statement by the German and French ministers who started the debate. Now we are in a different environment. Second, I think whatever comes out in France in the coming weeks, suddenly financing will not be easier. And when we can demonstrate collectively in Europe that doing a few things, reforms like securitization, savings products, etc., can really bring hundreds of billions of additional financing every year to the benefit of the European economy, normally it should be unlikely that people would simply say, I'm not interested, because you don't find 500, or if I had the saving issue, 800 billion a year so easily by other means than that. So I would imagine that those strong reasons should in the end prevail, but it will very much depend on the capacity of also other European leaders to convince about the need to move in that direction.
Thank you very much. I would like to open to the audience and use the remaining 10 to 15 minutes to also allow you to ask our esteemed panelists questions. Sébastien.
Thank you very much for this very interesting panel. I'm Sébastien Treyer. I'm the director of IDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development International Relations. We have heard from many of our partner think tanks in Poland, Czechia, Czech Republic, etc., that they are really looking for an industrial policy that needs public money. So I was trying to challenge a little bit what Enrico was saying about the fact that we had a divide between France, Italy, Spain on one hand, and the rest of Europe, to see to what extent you have any clue on what's the position of those member states who want to support their own industry in the coming years, but also are really fearing that there would be just a relaxation of state aid that would be in that area the main problem. So their support for something that would be more public money might be important, which does not mean that we don't need to work on capital markets union, but I just wanted to have your feeling on that.
Let's maybe collect questions. Thank you, Sébastien. There's another question just to the left, and then.
Thank you very much for this very stimulating discussion. I'm Clara Leonard from Institut Avant-Garde. So as you said, one of the key stakes today is to finance the green transition, and we should make sure that the private sector participates as much as possible, as well as public money, of course. However, the problem is that a large part of green investments tend to be less profitable, more uncertain than the brown investments. So how do you make sure that the capital market union fosters the right types of investment? Could you couple this reform with the creation of new complementary tools that will change the incitations and favor those green investments?
Thank you very much. And then Pervenche Perez with a further question.
Thank you so much, Pervenche Perez from AEFR, Association Europe Finance Regulation. Thank you for all what you said. It's, I think, it's good to hear it, also in these days. Now, Enrico Letta told us that maybe we don't want only Wall Street to be happy. Then I think if this is the case, you cannot discuss CMU without discussing banking union, because we're in Europe, and in Europe, banks counts. So, and when you discuss about banks and banking union, it's not for me only about revitalizing securitization. It's another topic. It's also, sorry to put the elephant in the room, about the architecture. And I want a multi-size architecture, but this chapter is completely frozen, even maybe more than the supervision one. And the other point I have is when it comes to the narrative, I think it's true that if you don't sell CMU to people, politicians, they never have the guts to put it on top of the list. So they need to feel that what they will do will be backed by their voters. Last time it was the green transition, fair enough, but we didn't use this momentum. I don't know why. And now if you look at what happened in the election, the item, you know them by heart. It was immigration, security, and purchasing power. So the green is not there. So how do we do it? How do we do the storytelling? Sorry to put it like this.
Thank you very much. Just, is there any further question? Otherwise, I would come back to the podium. Maybe, Enrico, would you be able to take the point on the narrative that Pervenche mentioned, as well as the issue that Sebastian raised about what is the dynamics behind the still needed public dimension to finance?
I think Sebastian's point is the center of the political debate, and this is why I wanted to have a report trying to, I would say, to set up the scene for a compromise among the 27. This is the aim of my report. If you ask me what do you think, I would say that a next generation EU 2.0 for the transition could be the right decision. But I know that this proposal is not, we say, supported by the 27. This is what I heard. And I think we need a compromise. The only possible compromise is to have first a big pillar of private money that can be the evolution of next generation EU. Because if we have to say very frankly, once again, what are the limits of next generation EU? I think there are two limits. And the two limits are, first, it was too much public money driven. Second limit is too much national. And in reality today, what we need is to have cross-border and so European investments with a public-private leverage. So my report tries to go in that direction, to say we need private and public, and with some ideas on how to bridge savings and how to finance the transition. And at the same time, is the only way, I think, to convince governments that are reluctant to open the door to what you said, Sebastian, so some public common investment leg, because it is clear that otherwise the only solution will be national state aid, and of course it doesn't work with only national state aid. So this is the aim of what I thought about what Pervenche said. I strongly believe, first of all, on banking union. I think it is very important, banking union, in terms of narrative, lessons for the narrative topic that you mentioned in the second part of your question. Because banking union wasn't completed because we created banking union under the pressure of a crisis. And when the crisis started to be over, the pressure to complete the banking union was over too. So in the last 5-7 years, we weren't able to complete it because the pressure of the crisis wasn't there. So your second part of the question is the crucial one. And I think it's, in my view, it is absolutely fundamental to say what we did in the last 5 years. It's fantastic, it's enormous, it's great. I think the triple transition is a great mission for Europe. But if we are not able to say how to finance it, the triple transition will be the biggest failure of the European Union, and it will bring down politically also the European Union. So I think it's an existential challenge to find the way to finance the transition. So this is why the only way, I think, is to create this narrative. And creating the narrative means also having very concrete tools. This is why some of these tools that I put on the table, they have to become something comprehensible for the large audience and not too technical. One of the problems of the capital markets unit is very technical, and it's not easy, even for people, even for entrepreneurs and SMEs and so on. And this is why, for instance, and I stop here, I wanted to put in the report something very political, but that, in my view, is the proposal that is working in the report. In the debates, I'm invited everywhere in Europe, and they ask me, please, a debate on the fifth freedom. So a debate on, after the four freedoms, goods, services, capital, and services, and persons, the fifth freedom, innovation, knowledge, research, how to have in the next 5 years a commission with the flagship of the fifth freedom. Because it works in terms of slogan, it is very comprehensible, and it is true. We are lagging behind on innovation and knowledge because we weren't able to put it at the center of our engine, of our mission. I think we have to work in a good combination between the two levels. If we are not able to create a comprehensible narrative on that and on these different aspects, it will be impossible to get the result only technically. Because the result only technically, at the end of the day, they need political energy, because some of the obstacles I mentioned, the fences on the supervision that I perceived in the Council April 18, you can overcome these fences only with some political, I would say, trade-off and some political deal. Otherwise, it will be impossible.
On the question of banking union and the issue of a sort of bigger picture, you said there's no next generation 2.0, but the bigger picture of maybe more public finance and private finance on these two aspects. And when we talk banking union, of course, we talk CMDI, but we also talk EDIS. I guess Pervenche has that in mind too. So what is, on these 2 points, difficult points I understand, but what's your take there?
On the banking union, we've just had the agreement on CMDI in the Council, and just with a very pragmatic view on this, this is what has been possible now. This is what we are able to agree on, and I believe the Commission was quite critical. I find overly critical, but I think we have made some good steps into the right direction. We are not there yet, that's also clear. Further work will be needed. At this point in time, politically more simply not possible, and let's now focus on implementing CMDI, because the trilogue is yet to happen with the new parliament. So this will be also interesting. We don't know what this will look like. It's certainly a new narrative also in parliament, I believe, and this is what we now need to focus on.
And on the issue of public finance and private?
Well, you know that we are, in terms of doing things solely with public money, very critical and skeptical. But we think that there's also areas where you can do very good things in combination of public and private finance. When you look, for instance, at startup, scale-up, and exit finance, that's where we are very open, not even open, we're making active proposals to work on this. We have made very good experiences with our ETCI, European Tech Champion Initiative, for startups and scale-ups. And one idea that we have put forward is to now extend this and make a program we like to call ETCI 2.0, so that also when it comes to exit financing, we will have this combination of public and private finance. As Mrs. Köhler-Gleit mentioned, this is something which is, in our view, quite successful. successful and where we have a huge need, because we see that we find the seed money in Europe, we find enough money for scale-ups, but when it comes to successful exits, suddenly the money is coming from the US or elsewhere, from the Gulf or Asia. Because the deep pockets to do this are simply not there. I mean, we have great ideas. We have innovation in Europe. We have some of the most innovative companies in the world. And startup and scale-up successes are quite impressive. When you talk to the EIB and EIF experts, the revenue, the yields are actually higher than in the US. But the very successful ones, when they want to go public or when they want to do their exit another way, they don't find the deep cash pools that are available in the US, and that's where our real problem lies. But this, of course, all goes back to our pension system. It has been alluded to. I believe that's the root of the whole problem, that our pay-as-you-go pension systems simply do not provide the cash pools that are needed to do what we all want to achieve.
I'm opening up the concluding round, but we have not forgotten the issue of green finance. And maybe Natasha, you could address that briefly, but also because it's the concluding round, we're keen to sort of have direct takeaways also for the German Franco Corporation. So from your perspective, what would be sort of the recommendation you would have also concluding this panel in terms of Franco-German cooperation? So the green incentives and the issue of your concrete recommendation.
I think this was a very relevant question, and we only alluded to it. And in the context of everything that has been said, I think we should be extremely careful. There's one we've seen from the political environment that the public at large is really, moving towards areas that politically are unknown to the youngest generation. I'm personally surprised, having gone through the crisis in 2008 and 12 and 15, how markets could react very, very strongly to financial incidents and price in a euro breakout scenario so quickly, and that they're not doing anything of this right now, where we have red lights lighting up in many countries. So I think we should always keep that in mind. And the green thing is really important. Why? Because Fritzi was saying we have 11 billion worth of savings that are sitting in zero interest rates accounts. Now, the tempting thing is to say, we take that savings, by the way, we put too much public money on the table, so this is private money, this makes everybody happy at the European political table. But then this money is put into investments, the green ones, that at the end of the day, and even the Mahfouz Pisani report says it, the return on this is at best low and at worst uncertain. So this is something we shouldn't make the mistake of having, on the one hand, an opportunity to make Europe closer to the people, and which is what we need, and to make a mistake by yet again bringing Europe, the downsides of Europe, to the eyes of the individual. And here, and that's my concluding remark. What do people retain from Europe? The euro. I mean, the euro, Mr. Trichet. The youngest generation was born with the euro, and nobody would have even think, even in the wildest political proposals now, in contrast with 12 months ago even, to say we put in question the euro. That's something. Maybe to many, Schengen is a different issue. It's a very critical issue. But for the youngest, I still think if you try and go and study in the UK right now, and you see the hurdle it is, I speak as a mother of a child of 12 studying in the UK and tell you, having queued in front of the embassy 3 times, having paid the social security system in 3 different countries, and it's still very difficult once you're not anymore in this Schengen environment to just live together. Maybe there will be some consciousness of it. But Next Gen EU is not in the mind of people. When you have people around, how is public sector helping your daily lives? They will think about France Relance, perhaps. They won't mention Next Gen EU. So it's a bit of it's more than a marketing, but it's bringing those things as in the daily lives of citizens and in the daily lives of firms. And I'll close on this. On firms, I was very glad to read in your report, Enrico, that the SME was so supportive. to what might come from CMU and from more integration. Now, what I was told by the Senate when I presented our last report was that, you know, those SMEs, and we senators speak to them every day, they don't know what to make of green transition reporting. They're helpless. And they find that those European rules are too complicated, too costly, we don't have the means. So here we have, you know, a huge opportunity, but also the possibility to make huge mistakes, and we should really be wary of not making them at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Natasha. Fitzi, from your side, what would be your concluding recommendation?
Yeah, I found this panel very encouraging, and to have at this point this discussion, because at the end of the day is really, we have heard there's no alternative, it's a huge chance. The question is what would be an alternative? I think for Europe to maintain our well-being is at stake. So it's, to me, the question, how do we make it happen? And how, with pragmatic steps, can we show that Europe works and that it works for people because their investments pay better and so on? And of course, it's a difficult task, but advancing on concrete things that are possible in a challenging environment, I think is what is absolutely required.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Christian?
Well, I would very much concur with what has been said already. I really think that there is a clear path that we can imagine where people invest more in instruments with a better return, a better reward, so their life is improved by the way that by the reason that the money they can save brings them more benefits, and at the same time is used in a way that will help our society to meet the challenges. And there is the question of really whether the green transition will be costly with uncertain results. And I don't believe that really, because the green transition is basically one, infrastructures, and two, corporates which have to adapt their way of organizing their production scheme. I mean, given the level, as was mentioned before, the level of innovation that we find at firms level, I trust that the firms are able to design a transformation, including a lot of innovations that will, in the end, provide a good return. But they need financing for that. What do they need? They need equity, and that's the issue of the savings products and how we help those savings to move to European equities with a good return. And second, they need debt or financing, and then we are back to the other issue. And more or less the same for infrastructures. Now, on the question of the various risks, for instance, green infrastructures, they need a very long-term financing, and there is, in a number of cases, a certain uncertainty or a level of risk that might be certainly higher than for real estate in loans, for instance. But the good thing with securitization is not only bringing a way of financing huge or massive amounts, it's also a way of distributing the risks to those that are best equipped to take them by the techniques that we know as tranching. So you can identify a small portion that is very risky but with a big reward, and then you sell it to those who like that kind of investment. They know they will lose 50% of it, but winning a lot of money on the other 50%, that's fine. And then you have a mezzanine tranche, and you have the ordinary tranche that fits into traditional investments that we can recommend to for individual savers or pension funds and life insurance products. So I'm rather confident that that should work and can work, and we need it to work in Europe, certainly.
Thank you very much. I think these were great concluding remarks for the whole panel as such. I mean, at the beginning of the panel, we raised the question, this time it's different, question mark. And I think, at least from what we've heard today, and we covered really a large technical ground, there is some optimism here that potentially there is a political momentum that can be endured despite the challenges that we have. But it's also clear that this is a big agenda and a challenging agenda in terms of further harmonization. We saw some ideas there. In terms of making it concrete, saving products, securitization, supervision. But also in terms of, and Pervenche has reminded us, in terms of us also not presenting it as just a finance project as such, but a project that leads to certain objectives. And maybe the term investment and saving union is one that demonstrates that is something bigger behind it than just finance. Now, this project or this event series is financed by public money. And so we have one thing that we need to ask you. There is a QR code for giving us feedback, because our funder, the Foreign Office, has asked that we are asking you and encouraging you to give us feedback. I also want to quickly mention that this is recorded, so people will be able to watch us in the coming days. And finally, I wanted to thank again the equipe here in the embassy, Ambassador Steinlein, as well as my colleagues in the Jacques Delors Centre for organizing this event. And I would be grateful if you stayed on for a further discussion on this rich discussion that we had here at the panel. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much to the panelists for being here.